All right, guys, we want to talk now about something called significant figures. Now, that's a big fancy word, but basically what it means is numbers, because that's what we're going to look at, is numbers. Numbers that are actually valuable. Significant figures are numbers that have some value when it comes to being measured, okay? So that's a little bit different. If you're measuring something and it has to have some value to it, we can say that that number is significant. Okay, so how do we figure out what numbers are significant? What kind of numbers, when we're talking about using numbers and adding and subtracting, multiplying, when we talk about the numbers, the math, which numbers when it comes to science are actually significant? Okay, there's several rules, and I gave you that paper the other day that went over the same rules, but I'm going to kind of shorten them for you so you can, again, kind of make it a little bit easier on you. But number one on the list, what is significant as far as a significant figure? Non-zero numbers are always significant. They always count to being significant. In other words, 1 through 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, those numbers always count as being significant. They have value, okay? So for example, if I give you a number like 3,456, how many of these numbers are significant? They have value. Well, in this particular case, obviously, all four of them do, right? Whoops. The 3, the 4, 5, and 6, because they're non-zeros, they have value. So every non-zero has value to it. So if you see a number and you're trying to figure out how many significant figures, or the shorthand version is Sig Figs, how many Sig Figs does it have? You can see that there are 4, okay? Pretty straightforward, right? So far. But the problem is, we've done 1 through 9. What about 0? 0 is the issue. Can 0 be considered significant? Well, the thing is, sometimes 0 has value, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it is significant, sometimes it isn't. So how are we going to figure that out? Well, it's actually, again, a couple of rules that help us figure it out. And they're pretty straightforward, okay? The first one, for zeros, okay, says leading zeros do not count as significant figures. Okay? Well, wait a minute. What is a leading zero? I've never heard of a leading zero. Well, these are zeros in the front of a number. For example, this 0.0486. All right. How many significant figures? 3. These 3, the 4, the 8, and the 6, are significant. Okay? They have value. Why not the 2 zeros here? It's real simple. And I know it's what? Why are they not significant? Why do not have value? They don't have value because the only thing they're doing here is they're putting the area here for the decimal place. See that? That means that these zeros are nothing more than place markers for zeros. Okay? That's all they are. They're telling you where that decimal point is. So these 2 zeros right here aren't significant statistically or mathematically. Okay? They're just placeholders for that decimal point. Okay? Does that make sense? So they don't actually count. These 3 count, these 2 don't. Okay? So leading zeros in the front, on the left side of this number, they never count, as long as there's nothing here. Okay? Now, what about zeros called captive zeros? Captive zeros always count as significant figures. Okay? So what is a captive zero? Well, if you look here at 16.07, that 0 is between a 6 and a 7. This number counts. Okay? This means there are 4 Sig Figs. That 0 here counts because it's between 2 other non-zero numbers, which means we have measured 16.07 milligrams, liters, whatever we're measuring. We have measured that number to exactly that amount. So that 0 does count because it's exactly 16.07. So that 0 does count, okay? Because it is not a place marker. It actually has value because of the fact that it has a 7 after it and a 6 before it, okay? So captive zeros, zeros between 2 non-zeros, always count, okay? Pretty straightforward, right? So we looked at zeros before the numbers and zeros between other numbers. What about the ones at the end of a number? They're called trailing zeros. Well, it depends as to whether or not they'll count based upon whether there is a decimal point. Okay? Trailing zeros are significant only if the number contains a decimal point. Okay? What does that mean? Well, I'm going to show you. This number right here, 9.300, has how many sig figs? Well, this one and this one, and these two as well, because there is a decimal point there. Okay? Now I'm going to show you what I mean real quick. All right, let's see here. If I go, let me put it up here. 9.300. There we go. Oops. These numbers here, because of that decimal, these zeros count. So I got 4. If I did this though, $9,300, there are only 2 sig figs, whereas this one there are 4 sig figs. Okay? Why? Because when I put that decimal there, that means I have measured exactly on my scale 9.300. Now, what if I did this though? This one also has 4 significant figures. But Mr. Crouch, isn't it the same number? Isn't it the same number? It's 9,300. What this means is, whatever I've weighed or scaled, whatever I've done, I measured it exactly to 9,300. It's not 9,301, 9,299, because this could be 9,000. This could be 9,299.51, right? But if I rounded it up, it's going to be 9,300. This is a rounded number, okay? With no decimal there, that means that's a rounded number, doesn't it? It means I have estimated this number. This one, however, means I measured it exactly where it's supposed to be, okay? Does that kind of make, I hope that makes some sense to you. All right, let's do this. Let's do one more here. Well, I'll tell you what, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do some practice, okay? Take about 3 or 4 minutes here for some practice. Let's look at a couple of these. This first one here, 1.0070 meters. Okay, how many significant figures we're going to have here? Well, let's find out. Obviously, the 1 counts, right? The 7 counts. So that's 2, isn't it? These 2 zeros here, what kind of zeros are they? Well, you can already see they're between the 1 and the 7, so they're called captive. And remember, captive zeros always count. That last 0 is a trailing. So is it going to count or not? Well, depends. If there is a decimal point, that 0 counts. If there isn't, it doesn't. Is there a decimal? There is. So I have 5 significant figures. All 5 of them count because captive zeros, right? Trailing zeros with a decimal point. That's why it counts. Okay, look at the next one. 17.10 kilograms. It's a trailing 0, isn't it? Is there a decimal? Yes. So that means I have 4 sig figs, right? Because the 1, 7, and 1 both count, or all 3 of those count. What if I give you this one? 100,890 liters. How many of those are significant? Well, we know the 1, the 8, and the 9 are obviously significant. What about the zeros? Well, these zeros are captive, aren't they? So they count. This zero right here is trailing, right? Do you see a decimal point though? I don't see a decimal point, so it doesn't count. So that means I got 3, 4, I got 5, just those 5, okay? That zero doesn't count because there is no decimal. If it was a decimal there, it would be significant, but there's no decimal there, so we don't count it. All right, try one more. 3.29 times 10 to the third seconds. Okay, forget this right here. Ignore this. We'll talk about this later. How many numbers are there? I see 3, don't you? And all 3 of them are non-zero, so those 3 count. What about this one? 0.0054 centimeters. These are leading, aren't they? And leading, because there's no there's not a 1 or 2 or anything over here. They're the first, they're the leading zeros. They never count. So we have just 2 significant figures, those. Okay? Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Then this last one, 3,200,000. Well, again, these are trailing, aren't they? Is there a decimal point, though? No decimal point. No decimal point, trailing zeros don't count. So I only have 2, the 3 and the 2 there. Okay? So again, hopefully just some of this practice will have helped you with that. Now, if you'll notice that paper that I gave you that had practice problems on it, right? Some of them ask you how many, there's a section at the very beginning of one that says how many significant figures. What I want you to do is I want you to go through them and see if you can figure out how many there are, okay? And what we'll do is we will go through those on the next slide, on the next video clip, okay? Pretty straightforward, or on one of our video clips, okay? The next clip that we will talk about is what if we start adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing with significant figures? How is that going to affect things, okay? But that's the next video, okay? All right.